The title of this vlog is Remembering Roger Shaw. What we know from the news is that Roger Shaw was found lying dead in Johnson Creek. I think he was found face down and divers had to pull him out. He was ID'd maybe less than a week later. They didn't know who he was. They just knew it looked like somebody in his 30s. But, so what we know now from the news is that Roger Shaw had a history of drug addiction and mental illness. We also know from previous reports in the news that Roger Shaw crashed his car back in August of 2012, his SUV, into a telephone pole, split it in half, the telephone pole, and ran naked across the highway and jumped in the Willamette River. That's what we know from the news. We also know from the news that several bystanders who saw that happen were relatively freaked out. Some people scoffed, some people were genuinely concerned, but none of those people seemed to know anything about Roger Shaw. Some people were glad to see that he walked away from it relatively unscathed. We know that at that time that he was intoxicated. But all of this that I've just mentioned is pretty much all we know about Roger Shaw from the news. I met Roger Shaw not long ago. In fact, it was shortly before that accident and shortly after again. I got to spend probably a total of maybe 2 hours time with Roger Shaw. And I don't know everything about him, but I know more than what is culminated in all of the news reports about Roger Shaw. I know that, yeah, he had a history of drug addiction and mental illness. But I also know that the Lord was reaching out to him at that time. And I'm going to digress just a little bit about myself and a little bit about Roger. When I first came to the Lord, God was reaching out to me while I was drunk and stoned and wrapped up in my sin, and I was a habitual womanizer, and I was not fit for any purpose. I had a thriving karaoke business, and I was working at the post office for many years, and I really just was wrapped up in my sin. As far as anyone knew, I seemed to be a semi-functional person, but I was coming home drunk most nights and passing out in my bed. Now, when the Lord reached out to me at this time, He did some really strange things in my life. Things that most people might say were delusional. I know that today, that in hindsight, maybe I made the wrong decision in sharing those experiences with Christians, per se. And I'm not trying to diss on Christians. I'm a Christian. But we're people. And sometimes when people share with you the strange things that happen to them when they're coming to the Lord, sometimes we look at them cockeyed. And I know that when I was in that situation that some people looked at me like I had grown an extra head. And some people try to show compassion in their own way, and I'm not laying blame on anybody. Some of the things that happened to me were really, really strange. I don't blame anybody for looking at me sideways. But what I do know is that Roger Shaw sometimes talked about some strange things. And I know that myself and perhaps others looked at him strangely when he came to us with these things. Some of them were legitimately strange. But I know that the Lord was working in my life at that time, at that place in my life. And I believe that the Lord was working in Roger's life, in that place, in that time in his life. I don't know what his statement of faith is or was. I know that his family wrote a really nice obituary. I really hope that Roger is with the Lord. And if so, I look forward to meeting him. You know, he had a great smile. The news really didn't talk about that. They showed a picture of him, and I think he was smiling in his mugshot. I want to say that if he's with the Lord, I really do look forward to seeing him again. And I think that he deserves more than what he was given by the news. I know that when those reports hit the news, that people comment, you know, they leave little comments, because it's sort of like a blog format. People leave their comments, and a lot of people said, oh, yet another meth head, and, you know, this is what drugs do to you, and all that stuff. But if you knew Roger, if you knew where he was coming from, we could have done a better job of coming alongside him, being a brother to him, being a support for him. You know that he was living in that SUV, and when he crashed into that pole, according to him, there was a reason for it. I don't know what his reasons were, but he described it as a miracle, actually, because he couldn't believe that he lived through it. He couldn't believe that his SUV was just shredded beyond recognition almost, and every single thing in his belonging was in that SUV, and every bit of it was broken and shredded, except for him. He came out and ran naked across the highway. You know, I have to say, if you had been in that accident and you walked out of it, you might have, I don't know, I might have celebrated. I might have got naked and run across the highway if I lived through that. He described it as a miracle that he lived through it. He didn't try to justify the danger that he put other people in, his actions at all. He knows, or he knew that, you know, committing suicide would be wrong. But my point of this whole thing is that there's more to it than what the news has reported. That he was found face down in the creek, and that he was 30-some years old, and that he had a history of drug addiction and mental illness. I think that the news could have done a better job of reporting on it. Maybe they could have found some people that knew him, asked them some questions if they really wanted to take the time. I know they took the time to ask people who were puzzled by his behavior. Maybe they could have looked out for some people that knew him maybe a little better than that. You know, I only talked to him for really maybe a total of a couple of hours, but I knew more than that. Roger, I don't know if you can hear this or not, but I remember you, and I remember you for more than what we've heard. And thank you for watching, and see you next time.